Hello, and a warm welcome to all my wonderful parents and children who are tuned in to Get Set Parent with Pallavi. For the last several months, we know each other because of the tips and tricks that I share with you on helping you with your parenting journey. From today, for 7 days, we're going to be doing something very, very different. I'm super excited to bring to you the first edition of the Get Set Parent Literature, Arts and Music Festival in association with Vishwarang. A lot of you were writing in and telling me, what do we do? Our kids are really getting bugged off this lockdown and, staying in at home. And, what can we do to entertain them? So your wait is over. For the next 7 days, they're going to be wonderful sessions meeting celebrated authors, storytelling sessions, art appreciation workshops, puppet shows, mime shows, musical concerts, theater workshops, and whatnot. So for the next 7 days, I would urge you and your children to look at the schedule carefully and mark all the wonderful sessions that you want to be a part of. Before we get into today's inaugural session and the much awaited inaugural speaker for the entire festival, I'm going to urge all of you to subscribe to my channel by pressing the bell icon and pressing all so that you don't miss on a single video update that comes your way over the next 7 days. Follow me also on my Instagram and Facebook pages so that you are completely in tune with what I'm doing. So here's hoping that the entire 7-day festival is a treat for all of you and for us at the organizing end. So let's get started and get into the first session of the Get Set Parent Children's Literature, Art and Music Festival in association with Vishwaram. What do I say about one of India's most prolific writers? Born in India pre-independence and having an illustrious career spanning over 7 decades, this gentleman is the proud recipient of the Padma Bhushan, Padma Shri and the Sahitya Academy Awards. His brilliant stories and novels have been adapted into series like Ek Tha Rasti, which was aired on Doordarshan, and films like Sat Khoon Maaf. My parents grew up reading his work. I grew up reading his work. And today my children are avid readers of his stories. A wordsmith extraordinaire, but still carrying a childlike charm and curiosity, even at the wonderful age of 86. It is my immense joy and pleasure to be inviting onto the Get Set Parent Literature, Art and Music Festival as our first speaker, the one and only Mr. Ruskin Bond. Good morning, Mr. Bond. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm fine. Up here in the hills, nice and sunny outside, but a bit chilly inside. Nice to be talking.
This is when it probably starts getting really cold and, for us, the winter that you're talking about is already peak winter for the rest of the country.
Right. Yes, I think you have to wait a little longer.
Right. So how have you been this pandemic? How has it been for you locked in at home?
Yeah. Well,
have you ventured out?
Somehow... not much, very little, but then writers usually work from home anyway, so I've been lucky in that sense. Done quite a lot of writing during this long period of confinement, and lots of reading, lots of sleeping.
Wow. So that's
been too bad.
Lovely. So, sir, as you know, we are embarking on a beautiful 7-day literature, art, and music festival. This is the first children's literature festival that Get Set Parent in association with Vishwarang we are hosting. And I'm so excited that you are the first speaker and you are going to be formally inaugurating our festival today. So children, we are going to get into a beautiful discussion with the one and only Mr. Ruskin Bond. But before that, may I request you, sir, to kindly declare the festival open.
Thank you. And it's great to be um, taking part in a children's literature festival. And I take great pleasure in declaring it open, this festival of literature, arts, and music. It's called the Get Set Parents Festival. So parents do get set and make sure your children can take part in it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Um, so, one of the questions I've always wanted to ask you, you've had a career spanning over 7 decades, right? If not longer. And, you have really, the pinnacle of writing, right? That's what you are to the rest of us. You've won the Sahitya Academy Award, the Padma Bhushan, the Padma Shri, numerous international awards, national awards. Looking back, is this the way you envisioned your life to go? Is this something you manifested for yourself? And what do you feel looking back as I've read that you started writing as a young boy of 10 or 12, and today you're doing it into your 80s. How do you feel?
well, well, I was fond of writing even when I was at school, but I got published for the first time when I was about 16 or 17. And as for envisaging this long writing career, I, I certainly didn't envisage awards and prizes. What I really wanted to do was have a lifetime um, of being a literary person, of
Okay.
writing stories, books, poetry. I just wanted to write. And if along the way I could make a living from it, even better. Mm.
Yeah.
And I think for most of those 70 years of writing, um, about 60 was spent, I actually lived off my writing. That is, my income came from it. There were few years, a few periods when I took a job, or
Okay.
when times were difficult when I had to do other things. But
Okay.
basically, I was committed to being a writer, and that's what I still am.
And your focus was always on writing for children specifically. And how did the love for children's literature come about for you?
Yes, well, no, when I started out when I was 16 or 17, I took myself very seriously and I was writing for adults.
Okay, I
So
see.
as a young man, I was writing for adults, and it was only when I reached middle age, when I was about 40, that I began writing seriously for children, specifically for children. Otherwise, there were always stories written even in those early years, which were
Hmm.
suitable for children or could go into children's books, but uh, they were written for the general reader. So it's I think it was only in around 1970 that I wrote my first book, which was aimed specifically at young readers, meant for them. Otherwise, I was just writing for everybody. In
Huh.
a way, I'm
Okay.
still writing for everybody, but
Yes.
some of the stories are maybe more, are more popular with youngsters, and others maybe with older readers.
So that's how
And
the
and those
character of
youngsters become
Rusty.
older readers.
Yeah. So when you started
Yes.
writing for
Well,
children, you
Rusty.
created Rusty.
Well, Rusty was me. Rusty was the boy in my first novel, The Room on the Roof,
Yes.
which was an autobiographical novel. It grew out of a journal I'd kept. And so Rusty, I called myself Rusty. Because at school everyone called me Dusty, with a D, but I changed it to Rusty.
Yeah.
Better to have rust than dust, obviously.
Af-
So so Rusty sort of
So, your stories, whether it's for children or the adults, and the ghost story series, all of these prominently feature the hills. And I mean, the description is so delicious. It's almost like, we're feeling the chill. We're feeling, the sipping on on hot chocolate, sitting on those wayside cafes. So, what's been the role of the hills in your life and in your stories? What's the story behind that?
well, up to 1964, when I was 30 years old. Up to that time, I'd been living largely in cities.
All
I'd
right.
been 4 or 5 years in Delhi, um, 3 or 4 years in London. So, and after some time, I felt I wasn't writing as freely and naturally as I wanted to. And I thought I needed a physical change too.
Okay.
So I came up to live in the hills, and I took a cottage outside Missouri. So this was a good 60, 70 years ago now. Um, and and things changed almost immediately. I became almost at once in touch with the natural world, because this cottage was right in the forest. It's not the one I'm living in now. I've since had to move further up the hill.
I see.
Um, for the first 10 years in the hills, I was living almost in the forest. And that brought me closer to nature, to birds, to animals, to trees and wildflowers. And they became a part of my stories and a part of my writing.
Yeah.
So, in a way, the natural world took over. And from being maybe um, just a writer, I became a nature writer too. And so a lot of my stories written off from that period onwards, you'll find that the element of nature is very much to the fore.
So, do you think that's one of the major factors that makes you click with children? They kind of transport themselves into that magical world, when they're mostly disconnected from nature, living in cities. And do you think that
Yes.
really
Well,
works for
of
children?
course, there have been many great writers who've written about city life.
Mm.
Um, you take Dickens writing about London in the 19th century, or Satyajit Ray writing about life in Calcutta,
Kolkata.
or R.K. Narayan writing about life in Mysore.
Malgudi. Yeah.
So cities inspire you too.
Hmm.
So some writers thrive on city life,
Yeah.
uh, and because no two writers are the same anyway.
Of
So
course.
I guess we respond in different ways
Yeah.
to different kinds of stimuli.
Yeah. So,
And
sir,
for me,
yeah.
Yeah,
Please, please, please.
yes, carry on. Hmm? Um, uh, at the same time, I grew up in a small town, Dehradun, which was really neither mountain nor plains. It's sort of in the foothills. And that too gave me a lot of material, because of my many of my very early stories written in the 1950s, late 50s, set there in this small town, are still very popular,
Yeah.
amongst the more popular of my stories. Tales like Night Train at Deoli or Time Stops at Shamli. A lot of people still like those. So I can't say that there is any. I think a writer should be able to write anywhere.
Anywhere.
But of
Yeah.
course, if your environment is a pleasant one and you're happy there, then naturally I think you'll write better in
Yeah.
that environment.
Right. Right. So, sir, can you tell us a little bit
But
about your early? early influences in writing? I mean, did you have role models growing up? Did you have your favorite authors? Were you influenced by, any writers on your journey?
Definitely, definitely. Unless you're a reader, you're not going to be a writer. I think if you look into the lives of all successful writers, you'll find that they were readers and still are. Mm. They don't stop reading. And it was I was a real bookworm. So fortunately, at my school, we had a good library. And I would sort of read practically everything that came my way, from plays, stories, novels, poetry, travel, even comics. I was a voracious reader, and so I wanted to emulate my favorite writers, not write like them, not copy
Right.
them, but be writer in their mold, in their attitude and their outlook. So favorite writers ranged from the classics, from Dickens to Emily Bronte, and then to um, current writers of my school days like Somerset Maugham and Graham Greene and others. And then lighter, more popular writers like P.G. Wodehouse and Agatha Christie.
Okay.
And then when I went to England for 3 or 4 years, and I was homesick for India, so I was reading Indian writers. I was reading Tagore, all of Tagore's plays and poems, and R.K. Narayan and Mulk Rajan, and the writers of that period. Um, and I've never stopped reading. So there it is. I still read old favorites, and now and then I venture
Yeah.
into something recent.
Yeah. So that's
Uh,
wonderful, and that's something I get from so many writers, that to be a good writer, you need to be a voracious reader, and it's not
Definitely.
going to happen that you just For all my aspiring writers, there, children who want to write,
No,
reading is
if you
the
want to
first step.
be a writer of a creative writer, right? Writer of fiction or
Yeah,
poetry, I think you need to be a reader because that you learn from reading. You know how writers think,
yeah, yeah.
and so you get into the same sort of thought process. Huh?
Right.
Uh, so otherwise, it would be very strange for someone to set off to write a novel if he'd never read one. Um, so, so, well, and yet people do think that that's possible.
Yeah.
But I think you have to, because you need a love for words, a love for putting sentences together,
True.
a love of
True.
language.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
not just a story. It's the language you use to tell the story. mm, That's important. And
Right.
where do you enrich yourself with language,
Yeah.
except through other people, except through literature as a whole?
Yeah. So, in the last so many decades, 6 or 7 decades, children's literature itself has had a transformative journey, both within India and internationally. What have been
Yes.
some of your observations regarding that? Like earlier, when we were growing up, we had a restricted set of authors, the more, a few
Yes.
comics, a few authors, but today, I
So
mean, it's huge. So, what's your observation?
you're right. In fact, when I was a boy, I found, as soon as I was a fluent reader, I was reading adult literature because there
Yeah,
wasn't much in the way of children's literature, apart from the established classics. We all read Alice in Wonderland and Treasure Island and others, but and then you went almost straight into reading, say, Agatha Christie or John
exactly.
Buchan.
Yeah,
So, and many kids still do that. But now there's certainly also when I go back to the 1950s, 60s, in India, we didn't have publishers who brought out children's books.
mm,
We were entirely dependent on what came in from Britain or America or other countries.
right.
Um, Very few children's books were being published, except maybe in Bengal, mm, Kerala, maybe here and there, and regional, and that too in in the regional languages. So, but that has changed now, and I think most of our better known publishers in India also bring out books for children. They have a list of children's books, apart from
Yeah.
importing or bringing in also a wide selection. So there is a lot to choose from. So kids can read, well, they can read Harry Potter or Roald Dahl or mm, on the way to reading uh,
Yeah.
more adult. Mm.
And there's a whole category of teen novels also, your Percy Jacksons, and the transition between absolute under eight and your adult literature. There's a lot in this, the Lord of the Rings, and all of that it's kind of an intermediate section also, which is being created now, I think.
True, yes, there is a lot of literature for young adults, what you
Yeah,
say, which
yeah.
was perhaps a section that was ignored before. I have a lot of my books somehow fit into that category now of young adults.
Yeah, yeah.
My first novel, The Room on the Roof, was written just for the general reader. It wasn't written as a children's book.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
Now I find it goes into the category of very often of young adult reading, sort of falling in between children's writing and adult writing.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I don't want to specify or put books into categories. Because children uh, come to books at varying ages. You can become a prolific reader when you're 7 or 8 years old, and on the other hand, you may not what discover books till you're 16 or 17. So there is really no, you can't. I don't really believe in the modern method of saying this book is meant for 10-year-olds or this is for 12-year-olds,
Okay.
because I think kids
Yeah.
develop mentally at different ages.
True,
And
true.
to books that you may not be a reader till you're in your late teens or even an adult. And on the other hand, you might start very young.
Yeah.
Of
So
course,
you
the
do
younger, the
think that
better.
reading can be picked up? So, a lot of our parents go through
So
this
I think
issue that,
I think what I've always done is just write for myself in a way. And if I'm
hmm.
enjoying, mm, if I'm enjoying what I'm writing, maybe hopefully someone else will.
So you do believe that if one hasn't grown up reading, they can still pick it up as a teen or as a young adult or even as an adult. Because today the emphasis is on early reading skills. A lot of parents, want their children to start reading early. And if they don't, they kind of start feeling that, the kid's been left behind. It's too late to pick up the reading habit. So what do you think about that?
I don't worry too much, provided they should have started reading at home,
Ah,
and the parents shouldn't think that the children should learn everything in school. I think
mm, mm.
I learned to read and write from my father at home before I was put in a boarding school or a school. Mm. And in fact, I did not start attending school till I was about 7. In those days, you didn't.
Right, right.
Nowadays, people send their kids to school when they're 3 or something. But
Two and a half, three.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I didn't go to school till I was 7. But I did know how to read and write a little because I'd learned at home,
Yeah.
um, which gave me an advantage when I did go to school. Because some kids were just then starting out, and I'd already. So it a lot depends
Yeah.
on parents, and parents leave everything to teachers. Huh?
True. No,
Of course,
you're spot
in
on.
today's world and in our country, a lot of say disadvantaged, underprivileged children might be growing up in a home where the parents may not have had much education. So they would depend a lot on their teacher
Yeah.
or on the school. But where the parents are educated, then I think it's up to them to also
Provide the
to
exposure to kids.
pay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, sir, going back to that point you touched upon, that writing is not it's not an overnight success story, and
No.
one needs to toilet it. It's
Yes,
supposed to
yes.
be very lonely. Can you take us through a typical day in the life of Mr. Ruskin Bond? What is a typical day like, and how do you kind of bring in the discipline of writing into your schedule?
Yes, well, it's mine is not a lonely life because I have a large adoptive family, and there's always somebody around. But I have my room to myself, and the early morning sun comes in, very welcome in winter. And I do most of my writing in the morning when I get up,
Okay.
before breakfast usually. So I'll do an hour or two in the morning, and that's the best time. One is
Okay.
um, uh, because later in the day there'll be interruptions,
When the
life
family is
around
awake, and
gets
yeah.
busy. People are knocking on the door or ringing the bell or the phone rings. So,
Yeah.
or the postman comes. There are 101 things to do.
Right.
So, every morning you usually have time to yourself. And for a writer, it's probably the best time. Later in the day, you can do more routine work, corresponding or getting in touch with your publishers or
Okay.
correcting proofs and things like that. But I think the original work, if you're writing a new story or working on a book, morning is best. Um, but if I wake
And
up
do
in
you
the
write
middle of,
every day, sir? Do you write every day?
I try to.
Okay.
Um, I'm not too strict about it, but I'll be happy if I write 2 or 3 pages every morning.
Oh,
And
okay.
then at least my conscience is at rest.
Right.
And but if say I get an idea in the middle of the night,
Huh.
well, I'm not going to sit down and write the story then, but I'll put on the light and jot it down so that it's not forgotten. So
Okay.
because you can get ideas anytime you during a walk, mm,
Yes.
in
Yes.
bed or the kitchen. So it's useful then to make a note of it, or keep a notebook or paper handy so that you don't forget it because that's something you may not be able to work on immediately,
Yeah.
but it could be useful later on. An idea
Yeah.
for a story,
Yeah.
or just a thought or a reflection or a
So,
memory.
right. Right.
So, so in a way, you're working all the time
Yeah.
because you're a writer
Your
full
mind is
time.
ticking. Your mind is on,
You're
and
you're absorbing the life around you. Sometimes, very often, consciously.
yeah.
If say if I go to um, some festival in town, uh, I would go with the idea that I might be able to write something about it,
Hmm.
and therefore be looking for
Yeah.
something to write,
Scouting for a few
looking for
inspirational
happiness,
moments. Yeah.
looking for happiness.
So, sir,
So
in your day, do you have any technological disturbances? So, do you watch any seasons? Are you on Netflix or any of these
I'm
streaming channels?
technologically illiterate. That's why just
Ah,
now I had to depend on my grandson Siddharth to put me in touch with you or Shristi or one of the others. And but I do well. I watch television, and
okay.
if somebody puts on a nice film on this laptop, I'll watch that too. As long as I
Okay.
don't have to do all the. Hmm,
So that's a secret of
yes,
finding time as well, right? Like,
yes,
so that's one of the things,
don't keep
today,
yes,
the
I don't keep a.
distraction for children, sir, is so much, right? I mean, the kind of availability of entertainment services on television, on live streaming, video gaming, most of the day is consumed by technology. And uh,
That's true. Sometimes you can't get them to talk to you because
the
the
phone,
their is, is stuck to the ear,
yeah,
or is in front of you where they're viewing something. There
yeah,
is you get so much now on the phone.
yeah.
I don't keep one, no, but I use everybody else's. So I'm very cunning. But
Yeah.
um,
So, sir, any tips you have for children
or young adults who want to start seriously getting into creative writing, what are those 2 or 3 things they should keep in mind when they embark on a serious commitment towards writing?
Yes, that's um, well, have something to say. You have to, if you know what kind of writer you want to be, you want to be
Okay.
tell stories, or you want to maybe write history or biography, or be a scientific writer. Also, you must have confidence in your language. That is, you must be fluent in whatever language you're going to write in, whether
Mm,
it's English or Hindi or any other language in the country. Uh, You you must be confident and of your of your fluency. At least be reasonably correct grammatically,
right.
and uh, and be able to put sentences together in a good in a an attractive way. Use words in an attractive way. Be original too. Be different. Not try to write like everybody else. Um, so, so those are I think, the basics. Have ideas. You need ideas. You need some imagination, not too
Yeah.
much. After all, you need imagination if you're going to write fantasy.
Yeah.
But if you're a realistic writer like I am, you don't have to be highly imaginative. Um, then then be regular with your writing. Another
Discipline.
thing is
Yeah.
discipline, and also don't give up easily, because as I did, you're bound to in early days have disappointments in trying to get published. You may not, your work may not get published for some time. It might come back to you from editors or publishers. So you could easily get discouraged. I've known over the years young writers who were talented, but because they had early rejections that they sort of got discouraged and went and did other things. They went into
Mm,
advertising or into
okay.
journalism, things like that. So uh, yeah, so don't give up easily. That you have to be, if you're truly committed and want to be a writer, you must stick with it for some time.
Yeah.
And remember that if your work is good, you are entitled to a reward. I've always felt that a writer should be paid for what he or she does if it's good, and if people are reading it. Whereas a lot of nowadays youngsters and oldsters too, who are impatient to get into print or want
Yeah.
to see that byline on a book, might
Yeah.
spend their own money, spend a couple of lakhs to get their book
Published. Yeah.
printed,
Yeah.
because they're in a hurry. And they might be disappointed then if that book doesn't take off, or if it's
Mm, mm,
because it maybe they should have waited longer, or work more on it, or
yeah.
waited a bit, not been
Yeah.
too impatient. And then that first one flopping, they may not want to do another.
Do another.
So I think one should expect um, um, something in return. Well, that's how I made a living from it all
Yeah.
these years.
Yeah.
I
So
didn't I
it's
didn't
so, yeah.
get filthy rich, but I didn't stay filthy poor either. I managed uh, to live off my writing
Of
for the
course, of
greater
course.
part of my adult
So
life.
clearly, writing is not
Um,
an instant gratification game. It's not like I've written a story, so I'll get published, it'll become a bestseller. It's none of those, and it
no, it
needs
is.
a pursuit and rigorous pursuit at that.
Yes, it is true.
Yeah.
That instant bestseller might happen once in 500 case out of
Yeah.
500 cases, but sheer luck. But it's normally it takes time to get established.
Right.
Name as a writer, yes, it takes time. My first novel was quite successful, but after that, since I was so young, I was just 18, 19. I didn't have anything else to write, so there was quite a gap before before the next one could come out or be written.
Yeah. Yeah. So, sir, apart from writing, you also dabbled in a movie. You did a Bollywood movie recently. How was your experience? Not recently, a few years with Sadhkun Maaf.
yeah,
How was that
I must,
experience for you?
well, I must have been very bad because nobody has offered me a role after that.
You were
I,
memorable for sure as the father in the role.
I'd written the story for this film Sat Khoon Maaf,
Yes.
and I had to act as a sort of benevolent elderly gentleman giving advice to Priyanka Chopra um, in a bar, and I had to uh, just had about two lines and give her a fatherly peck on the cheek. Well, I, I don't have the good fortune to give fatherly pecks on the cheek on beautiful actresses. But I did it rather clumsily. And the director said, another take, do it again, Mr. Bond. So I gave it another fatherly peck on the cheek. It still wasn't very good. So it once more, so after 7 fatherly pecks on the cheek, he said, I think you're doing this deliberately, Mr. Bond.
Oh,
So,
it was such a treat to see you suddenly on screen, and
well, no, that happened again. Although
also yeah,
at school I used to be good in
acting.
plays. Yeah, they used to uh, make me act as usually as a tipsy uh, fellow with a bottle of whiskey in my hand. Usually the bottle would be filled with weak tea, no milk or sugar, and I had to pretend it was liquor. So I used to win prizes for that. But otherwise, I'm afraid my acting career never really took off.
To go. So I wanted to touch on your ghost stories a little bit. So you've had this as a consistent genre in your writing, and I'm personally a fan of your ghost stories. And I used to actually think that how many plots could be there in ghost stories. It's typically these three or four things, but you've managed to churn out several short stories. Captain Young was the book I was recently reading, and
Ghost
where
story,
is the inspiration for ghost stories coming from?
well, I
Have
think
you
they're
had
the
any personal encounters as well?
I've not had any personal encounters.
No?
I have to now confess that I have never in my life met a ghost. I make them all up.
Wow.
I have fun doing so, and kids like being scared a little. Although they um, sometimes a little girl complained to me. She said, "So I like your ghost stories, but they're not scary enough." She said, "Can't you make them more frightening?" So, but ghost stories are easy to write because you're just inventing a ghost. You're
Inventing.
dealing with real people. Um, and one of the first books I read as a boy when I was 8 or 9, which I remember, was called The Ghost Stories of an Antiquary by a writer called M.R. James. And he was a brilliant writer of ghost stories.
Okay.
And so I perhaps felt I should write the occasional ghost story myself, just explore that genre. But I haven't explored the supernatural world. I'm sure I'd be scared to death if I saw a ghost. So, but I do make them up.
Yeah. No, and what I love about them
Uh,
is, you introduce the characters, you get so deep, and you have wound up the story sometimes in all of 4 pages. And it's like, you've been so succinct with your language, and the story has unfolded and folded, in flat 3 or 4 pages. That's amazing.
I try to admit, a lot of people do believe in ghosts and see
Yeah.
them and have psychic experiences. So I try to imagine what it's like for them, maybe, and to put myself in their minds and see what they're seeing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because, um, I mean, a lot of famous writers did believe in ghosts, including
Right.
Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. You know,
Sherlock
he used
Holmes.
to
Yeah, yeah.
go to seances and call up the dead. So, but I wouldn't want to get too far into it. I just during this coronavirus epidemic, I've been writing a few news stories,
Okay.
and I've written a couple of ghost stories. One of them is about a. It's not exactly a ghost story. It's about a girl who at night turns into a leopard, and
Oh,
by day there's a man who's in love with her, but in the evening when the sun starts going down, she wants to kill him.
wow.
And so there's quite a conflict going on.
Wow. So,
um, la-
when can we
lady by
expect to read
lady by
all of
day,
these?
by night. Hmm?
When will they reach all of us? The
Yes,
new
well,
the new lockdown collection of Mr. Ruskin Bond.
yeah, I've written a few. The thing is, the publishers are slowing down now, so I think
Ah,
hopefully, hopefully things will pick up and more books will be coming out in the coming year.
yeah. No, sir, eagerly awaiting. So, just before we conclude, one or two things to parents. We have a lot of parents, on our YouTube channel and everywhere. Frequent questions that they have. One is, parents are stressed about how their kids will turn out. They want them to do a lot of things. There is a lot of pressure that kids also
Mm.
go through from their parents. And
True.
a lot is academic, of course, when it comes to not just school performance, but the extracurriculars, the co-curriculars, the reading. What's your advice to parents of the young generation, parents who are in their 30s today or 40s?
Yeah, it is a problem because the world is so competitive now, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes, and although there are far more avenues of for careers open to you than there used to be. I mean, I remember when I finished school, most of the boys either they went into the army, or maybe they became engineers or teachers. They were very
right,
limited,
right.
and uh, and now there's so many career openings and things that you can do. But at the same time, the competitiveness is there because over the years, education has spread so much. Whereas, and so, say 50 years back, when a few thousand kids were coming out of school looking for jobs, now
Yeah,
there'll be hundreds of thousands
of
of kids
course.
coming out of school
Yeah,
or,
yeah,
or college
yeah.
looking for jobs or a way to make a living. So it is difficult and the pressures are there. So everybody wants their son or daughter to get over 90% in their exams. When I was at school, nobody got more than 70%. That was thought it
True.
was the highest
Oh,
you could
hundreds,
reach.
hundreds commonplace these days, the way it
Yeah.
appears.
So what happens to somebody like me who just struggled to pass? You have to become a writer. That's
They
all that's left.
become Mr. Ruskin Bond, the amazing writer, I guess.
Who never could get through in maths.
So, yeah.
So it is difficult. But I would tell parents not to put too much pressure uh, on their kids. But at the same time, a little pressure. Otherwise, it. I mean, after all, it's only natural for a boy or girl to prefer going to a party than to be going to class.
Yeah.
So, so you need a little mm, uh, reining in too. Yeah.
Right, right, right.
So my sympathies with parents. After all, I depend on parents in a way, because even if a young reader wants to buy a book, he has to get the pocket money from his mom or dad, usually.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, sir, which are those three, four books from your collection you would recommend to our young readers that parents should like go out and get there? I have a few of the books here. This is the Great Stories for Children,
Yeah, that's
and I have
a popular one.
the
They're,
Essential
they're very popular. Yes,
and
these
the Whistling Schoolboy. This is adorable as well.
they're all doing well, those three. Yes, it's a good selection. Thank you.
And
And I've
the
just
ghost stories ones as
had
well.
a book published called How to Be a Writer, which might be useful
That's,
uh,
yeah, how to be a
to,
writer for kids or parents as well. Anybody could.
yeah, it came out just 2, 3 weeks back. It might be. It, hopefully it will be helpful.
Yeah. So, sir, a parting word, parting note. We're going through difficult times in the pandemic, and children especially are locked in at home. Since March, they haven't gone to school, they haven't met their friends, and it looks like this will go on a little longer. Any cheering up words for our little audience out there?
Yes, it's tough on youngsters because they don't like to be cooped up all the time. Huh? It's all
Yes.
right. A writer in his 80s, I did it. I do more work, but for young people, it is tough, definitely, and things are gradually easing, and hopefully, with everybody seems to be coming up with vaccinations. I hope they can be used soon, and in any case, young people are mostly are pretty well, I think, immune in a way if they're normally healthy and look after
Yes.
themselves, then
Yes.
they're not going to get sick
Yeah.
in a hurry. And so, although, and I think with the recovery rate also being so good in India, particularly, I think that's a good sign.
Yeah.
It'll be hopefully just like another cough or cold in the end.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. And yes. So thank you, sir. Thank you. I've had a wonderful chat with you. And, all our wonderful readers who've always been curious to get into, the life of Mr. Ruskin Bond. Thank you for inviting us into your living room in Missouri and, you're spending a beautiful chilly morning with you. And
Thank.
it's
It's
been
great.
such a pleasure.
To you and good luck to all of you.
Thank you.
In
Thank you
all
so
your,
much. And
in,
yeah, so dear children, today was the first day, and stay tuned because we have the US Puppet Theatre coming up with a wonderful puppet show next. So don't log off. And tomorrow we have a wonderful storytelling session and meeting the author of. The boy who loved his numbers, the story of Ramanujan, and a lot of art workshops as well tomorrow. So stay tuned. Thank you, Mr. Bond, again. And do take care of yourself. And we can't wait to get hold of the next collection of stories that you release.
thanks, thanks a million.